Member for Timmins, James Bay.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm very proud to be taking part in this debate here in my Northern Ontario village. COVID has clearly plunged Canada in the worst economic catastrophe and medical catastrophe for the past century. This pandemic has shaken our economy to its very core and has jeopardized the future of millions of workers. It's therefore essential for this Parliament to be a leader. We have to work together. We have to make the necessary investments to bring our country safely through this pandemic. I'm therefore very proud to be participating today in this discussion on this situation here in Parliament.
It's really, really crucial when we're talking about the speech from the throne and where we need to go, that we frame our role in terms of we are in the worst medical and economic catastrophe in a century. And I know that members of every party, like myself, are on the phone all day to people who are really frightened, people who are frightened by the rising numbers of COVID cases, people who are still dealing with the catastrophe we saw in the long-term care homes, particularly in Ontario and Quebec, and worry about their aged loved ones. We need to be putting people front and center, and we can do this. We can have a very spirited and at times confrontational Parliament, but the focus is to get the services out there and what are the best ways to get the services. That's one of the reasons the New Democratic Party fought so hard to change the what was the CERB, and that the Liberal government was going to drop to $1,600 a month. We said that that would leave over 1 million Canadians, the gig workers, the contract workers, in a very precarious situation. And I think it's forced a discussion about the problems of an economic system that for years was dependent on keeping people in contract positions, part-time work, precarious gig economy, so that when COVID hit, 2 million people were not able to pay their rent within 2 weeks of the lockdown, and we have to change that. And our focus right now has to be getting people through the long winter ahead. So on the speech from the throne, Madam Speaker, it reads like an NDP platform. It reads like everything the NDP have been running on for years. But the problem is the Liberals always run on the NDP platform. They just never govern from it. I think I was a young man with little children when the Liberals started promising childcare. So I'm glad they're promising it again. But will we see it? I'm glad they're promising pharmacare, but they promised it in many, many forms and never delivered. But this is a minority government. This is about our opportunity to put forward negotiations to make things happen. And I think there is a will right now to move Canada forward to a new normal. It's going to take an enormous investment from the federal government to get this nation through. I want to speak to two issues that one's I think very concerning, and one may be very positive for my region in the north. We are dealing in the midst of the pandemic with the other great pandemic, the opioid crisis. It has been a disaster. I'm talking to people in North Bay about it. I'm talking to people in Sudbury, Kirkland Lake. Timmins has been hit very, very hard. We have mixed in with the opioid crisis, the homelessness crisis. Upwards of sometimes 1,000 people homeless in the Timmins region, a community of 44,000. And I congratulate our mayor, George Peary. I congratulate the people who work at the DSAB board, the mental health workers, the police, Living Space in Timmins, who've done an amazing job trying to keep people safe and keep people housed. But what I notice is that the Liberal government quietly let many of the programs that could have helped die over the last year. A lot of the monies that should have been there for opioids are not there. The money for homelessness, there's been great promises, but it dried up very quickly. So we're hearing positive language from the government, but when will that money be delivered? Because this winter is going to be a very, very hard winter in Canada. And I'm very, very concerned about the situation of the opioid crisis and the homelessness crisis as it fits in our communities in Northern Ontario. And this is something that's not partisan. Every single community in the country is facing this disastrous crisis. We have to be ready to work together to get this through. But that means the Liberal government has to move from positive words, because I think sometimes they think if they say positive words, they get positive results. Nah, that's not how it works. Positive words means action. Action means we have to get the money out there now to address the opioid and homelessness crisis. I was very pleased in the speech from the throne about the commitment on electric cars. Now, that's certainly something that will help manufacturing in Southern Ontario. But I think we need to put, if we're going to talk about a green recovery and a sustainability lens, we have to be saying, if we're going to put federal investment into these plants, that the sources of the raw materials, let's put a green lens on that the products that are mined have Indigenous agreements, that they're moving towards sustainability, because that will give an enormous advantage to Canada. Rather than taking nickel from Indonesia or the war zones of Congo for copper and cobalt, we need to be able to say that we are going to insist on a environmentally sustainable and Indigenous positive resource policies to help the manufacture of electric vehicles. For example, Madam Speaker, we may have a massive new nickel mine in the Timmins region, and they've already come out front saying they want to have a whole environmental plan to get to zero emissions. We have Borden Mine in Northern Ontario that is working with zero emissions. They've removed the diesel machines from underground and are going completely electric. In my community of cobalt, we have the first cobalt refinery being set up, and cobalt is essential. There is no clean energy future without cobalt, but right now, the world's majority sources are coming from Congo with a horrific record of human rights abuses, child labor, environmental degradation, and it also puts us into a geopolitical war with China for who's going to control the cobalt resources and the future of a digital economy. We have an opportunity in Canada to turn that around, to say we can do it environmentally sustainable. I think one of the things that has to come out of the pandemic is a real discussion about when and how are we actually going to start meeting our targets and meeting an environmentally sustainable future so that we're making investments and we're creating the jobs that are important here. This is something we need to be doing now because the government's making the investments to get us through the pandemic, but this has to be for a long-term vision. I think at the end of the day, though, our focus right now is about working people who have been completely upended by the crisis. The people that I know who were in the gig economy, people who worked in the service sector. I'm very, very, very concerned about the rising numbers, because if we go into new lockdowns, we just see Quebec is moving into zone red. If restaurants start to close, many of them will not reopen. That is the reality. We need to be addressing the potential economic catastrophe if we don't get the numbers in check. And for this, the federal government can play a huge role. This is why the NDP pushed for the sick leave benefits, something that allows workers who are in less protected areas to actually be able to take time off so that we're lessening the COVID numbers. Madam Speaker, I think we did something historic this week in putting workers first in making those fundamental changes. I know that we've stayed up till 3 a.m, but I want to say how proud I was that the Bloc Québécois and the Conservatives supported the New Democratic Party's efforts, and we voted unanimously. We, as the New Democratic Party, will continue tough negotiating, but to keep the focus on getting people through the pandemic so people can look to the federal government and say, we in Canada are doing our part and we're not giving in to the kind of horrific political chaos that we're seeing south of the border. And we're also seeing that other countries are being plunged into much worse conditions. We need to stay focused at this time. So I thank the Liberals for stealing so many great New Democrat ideas in the speech from the throne. I'm going to make your life a living hell at times to make sure you live up to it. That's my job. You know, that's my job as the honorable opposition. But I think we can actually come out of this parliament showing something better for Canadians and a reason to believe. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Kings Heads.
To thank my honourable member from Timmins James Bay for his remarks. I enjoyed and I listened to his intervention quite intently. Of course, he comes from a riding in a part of the country where the natural resource sector is extremely important. He referenced some of that in his speech. Coming from Kings Hants here in Nova Scotia, whether it's agriculture or our forestry sector, those natural resources are extremely important, and they're important to the Canadian economy. Can he speak to the speech from the throne where our government put forward a vision of working with natural resource industries to be able to get them competitive for a low carbon economy? I have to assume that accords with his ideology and really speaks to his constituents in his riding. Can he speak to that?
Well, I think we are a natural resources country. What we really need to do is start to get serious about lowering the emissions, because I remember talking with Stéphane Dion in 2005 when he talked about voluntary emission standards and that would get us to meet our Kyoto targets, and our emission standards have jumped and tripled and quadrupled ever since then. We need real clear commitments. In terms of forestry, we have been hammered in the softwood lumber dispute by unfair American practices, and it hasn't created more American jobs. It's created opportunities for European competitors. Imagine that. Netherlands being able to ship wood to the United States because we're being blocked from our natural market. So I encourage the Liberal government to stand up for our industries, to stand up for agriculture, to make sure that the trade policies are not punitive, because we can compete, and I think we can compete in a much more environmentally sustainable way, and we're going to have to. That's the future. We have to be environmentally sustainable.
Some comments, the honourable member for Peace River Westlock.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and to my honourable colleague, thank you for his speech. My constituents were very disappointed and distraught about the usurpation of democracy with the order in council that the Prime Minister put forward to ban many handguns and many guns across the country. I know that they have repeatedly spoken to me about the issue. They say that this is undemocratic, and they also are concerned about what are the criteria for the banning of firearms across the country. They see this as a property rights issue. I'm just wondering what the member's constituents have been telling him about the undemocratic use of an order in council to ban firearms from his constituents. Thank you.
The honourable member for Timmins James Bay.
Well, I come from a region with lots of guns. I'm a registered gun owner myself. I've had very few people I know have AR-15s and military assault weapons. But when they ask me about it, I say, well, you know who came up with this idea about using a cabinet to make decisions on gun policy? That was Stephen Harper. Stephen Harper came up with that scheme. And I remember at the time thinking, you conservatives, it's going to come back to bite you. The Liberal government's going to come in. They're not going to have to take this through Parliament. It's not going to need a vote. So I think if my Conservative colleague is upset about undemocratic measures, about gun owners with their AR-15s and other military weapons, ask his colleagues, why did Stephen Harper think it was such a bright idea to shift gun policy from the RCMP, where I think is a better position to be in, than in the hands of cabinet? So that's a good question he could ask, I think, his colleagues.
The honourable member for Saint-Jean. Thank you, Madam Speaker. My colleague, he waited for a long time, and he's still waiting for a childcare service. Had he lived in Quebec, he would have been able to have childcare, because we are at the avant-garde of it all. If, for example, there's a federal program, Quebec would have the right to withdraw with compensation. So what does he believe on the fact that for this kind of program, there should be that option?
I'd
like to thank you for the question for the NDP. Inaudible for the interpreter. For example, for childcare, Quebec is a model. I approve of that. For the NDP, in Quebec, there are programs. Inaudible for the interpreter. It's also essential for Quebec to have its jurisdictions so that they can develop their plans with their objectives. It's as simple as that.
Reprise du débat. Resuming debate, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.